When I traversed the American continent in the 1830s, I witnessed a vibrant democracy pulsing with civic energy that astonished my European sensibilities. Citizens gathered in town halls with passionate intensity, formed voluntary associations with remarkable ease, and engaged in public affairs as if their very liberty depended upon it, because indeed it did. The spectacle of free men governing themselves through reasoned deliberation and collective action represented humanity's greatest political achievement. Yet were I to observe America today, I would recognize the familiar forms of democracy while mourning the death of its essential spirit. The machinery of elections continues to turn with mechanical precision, but the vital force that once animated American democracy, that remarkable combination of individual liberty and collective responsibility I so admired, has been systematically extinguished by forces I once warned about as potential dangers. What remains is the hollow shell of democratic institutions without the living breath of democratic culture, a political corpse that walks among the living, deceiving observers into believing democracy still thrives when only its shadow remains. Chapter 1: The Corpse of Civil Society. The first and most devastating sign that American democracy has perished lies in the systematic destruction of what I considered its greatest strength, civil society. In my time, I marveled at how Americans could not undertake any significant project without forming an association. Americans of all ages, all conditions, and all dispositions constantly form associations, I observed with wonder. Churches, schools, charitable organizations, professional societies, literary clubs, agricultural improvement societies, these voluntary bodies created a rich tapestry of civic engagement that mediated between the isolated individual and the distant state. This intermediary realm served as democracy's beating heart. Through associative life, citizens developed the essential skills of democratic governance, compromise, deliberation, leadership, and the subordination of personal interest to common good. They learned to trust one another, to work across differences, and to take responsibility for their community's welfare. Most crucially, these associations prevented the dangerous concentration of power by creating multiple centers of authority and initiative. Today, this intermediary realm has been hollowed out with surgical precision. Americans retreat into their private spheres, interacting with public life primarily through digital screens that simulate community while destroying genuine human connection. The art of association, that fundamental skill of democratic citizenship, has atrophied beyond recognition. Where once Americans gathered spontaneously to solve local problems through collective action, they now passively consume political entertainment or surrender responsibility to distant bureaucratic mechanisms. Consider the transformation of American neighborhoods. Once vibrant with civic organizations, local committees, and informal networks of mutual aid, they have become collections of strangers who know nothing of each other's concerns. The social capital that made democratic governance possible has evaporated, leaving citizens isolated and powerless. This is not merely social change, it is democratic death. For democracy cannot survive without citizens who possess the habit of acting together for common purposes. When people lose the capacity to organize themselves voluntarily, they become subjects rather than citizens. The few associations that persist have become professionalized advocacy organizations that treat citizens as donors rather than participants. These hollow institutions may claim millions of members, but their membership consists of people who write checks rather than attend meetings, who receive newsletters rather than engage in deliberation. The spontaneous, local, problem-solving associations that once characterized American democracy have been replaced by centralized institutions that discourage rather than cultivate genuine civic engagement. Americans have traded the demanding work of citizenship for the comfortable passivity of spectatorship, and democracy has died in the exchange. Chapter 2: The Tyranny of Uniform Opinion. Perhaps even more alarming than civil society's collapse is the emergence of an intellectual despotism more complete than any I could have imagined. In the 1830s, I warned of the potential tyranny of the majority, the danger that democratic public opinion might become so powerful as to silence dissenting voices. I know of no country, I wrote, in which there is so little independence of mind and real freedom of discussion as in America. Yet what has emerged in contemporary America surpasses my gravest fears about the tyrannical potential of democratic society. A new form of intellectual tyranny has established itself, one that operates not through crude government suppression but through the more sophisticated mechanism of social ostracism and professional destruction. Ideas that challenge the prevailing orthodoxy are not debated on their merits, they are declared illegitimate before examination. Citizens self-censor not from fear of government persecution but from terror of social and economic annihilation by their fellow citizens. This intellectual uniformity extends across institutions that once provided diverse perspectives essential to democratic deliberation. Universities, media organizations, cultural institutions, and professional associations have become echo chambers that amplify approved opinions while systematically excluding alternative viewpoints. The marketplace of ideas, that essential mechanism for testing truth through competition, has been replaced by a monopoly of thought that would make any medieval inquisitor proud of its efficiency. Most perniciously, this tyranny presents itself as liberation. Those who enforce intellectual conformity claim to be promoting diversity while ruthlessly punishing the only diversity that matters in a democracy, diversity of thought. They speak the language of tolerance while practicing the most intolerant suppression of dissent. They invoke democratic values while destroying the intellectual freedom that makes democracy possible. This corruption of language itself represents a fundamental assault on democratic discourse. The mechanisms of this tyranny are subtle but devastating. Social media platforms amplify conforming voices while suppressing dissent through algorithmic manipulation. Professional organizations destroy careers for ideological noncompliance. Educational institutions indoctrinate rather than educate, producing graduates who can repeat approved opinions but cannot think independently. The result is a citizenry that has lost the capacity for genuine political thought. Americans no longer engage in the demanding work of examining competing ideas and forming independent judgments. Instead, they adopt ready-made opinions from their chosen tribal authorities and defend these positions with religious fervor rather than rational argument. They have forgotten that democracy requires citizens capable of changing their minds when presented with better evidence or reasoning. This intellectual death sentence ensures that American democracy cannot adapt, learn, or improve, the surest sign of institutional mortality. Chapter 3: The Aristocracy of Administrative Power. When I studied American democracy, I was struck by the decentralized nature of power and the active role of citizens in governing themselves. Local communities possessed real authority to shape their own affairs, and citizens viewed participation in public life as both a right and a sacred responsibility. Town meetings embodied democracy in its purest form, where neighbors deliberated face-to-face about common concerns and made binding decisions about their shared future. This has been systematically destroyed by the emergence of what I must call an administrative aristocracy more powerful and pervasive than any hereditary nobility. An elaborate bureaucratic apparatus now governs American life with a comprehensiveness that would astonish the most absolute monarch. Every aspect of existence, from education to healthcare, from business to charity, from family life to religious practice, falls under the regulatory authority of distant administrators who claim superior knowledge and moral authority. These new aristocrats do not inherit their power through birth, but they exercise it with no less arrogance than any hereditary nobility, and with far greater reach into the intimate details of citizens' lives. This administrative class has developed its own interests, separate from and often opposed to those of the citizens they supposedly serve. They speak a technical language incomprehensible to ordinary Americans and make decisions based on abstract theories rather than practical wisdom gained through local experience. They view citizens not as sovereign participants in democratic governance but as clients requiring expert management, children needing paternal guidance, or problems requiring technical solutions. The tragedy is that this usurpation has been accomplished through ostensibly democratic forms. Citizens have been persuaded to surrender their governing authority voluntarily, convinced that complex modern problems require expert solutions beyond their comprehension. They have traded the demanding responsibility of self-government for the comfortable dependency of administrative care, not recognizing that this trade makes them subjects rather than citizens. Consider how local institutions that once provided real governing experience have been reduced to rubber stamps for federal and state mandates. School boards cannot govern schools, city councils cannot control cities, and state governments cannot govern states. All have become mere implementation agencies for distant administrative authorities. Citizens no longer learn the arts of democratic deliberation and compromise because they no longer possess meaningful authority over their own communities. This administrative tyranny is particularly insidious because it presents itself as benevolent expertise rather than naked power. Citizens accept it because they have been taught to distrust their own judgment and defer to credentialed authorities. Yet democracy requires citizens who know how to govern themselves. America now produces only subjects who know how to obey. The death of self-government is the death of democracy itself, regardless of how many elections continue to be held. Chapter 4: The Atomization of the American Soul. The death of American democracy manifests most tragically in the complete atomization of American society. The individualism I once admired as a source of democratic energy has metastasized into a destructive force that isolates citizens from one another and renders collective action nearly impossible. This represents perhaps the most profound transformation in American character since my original observations. In the 1830s, American individualism was balanced by robust associative instincts. Citizens valued their independence but understood that genuine freedom required cooperation with others. They pursued their private interests while accepting responsibility for public welfare. This balance created a dynamic democracy where individual energy served collective purposes. Americans today live in a state of profound social fragmentation that makes democratic citizenship impossible. They inhabit separate information universes, consume different news sources, attend different churches or none at all, shop in different stores, and increasingly lack any shared foundation for democratic discourse. More fundamentally, they have lost the capacity to trust one another sufficiently to engage in the compromises and negotiations that democratic governance requires. This atomization has been accelerated by technologies that promise connection while delivering isolation. Americans interact more with digital representations than with actual neighbors. They form political opinions through algorithmic manipulation rather than through face-to-face conversation with people who hold different views. They mistake online echo chambers for genuine communities and digital activism for real civic engagement. The public sphere, that essential space where citizens encounter one another as equals, has been fragmented into countless private bubbles. The economic transformation of American life has contributed to this social dissolution. Geographic mobility, while offering opportunities, has destroyed the stable communities where democratic habits once flourished. Americans move frequently, work long hours, and live in suburbs designed to minimize rather than maximize human interaction. They know neither their neighbors nor their local representatives, making meaningful civic participation impossible. The result is a society of strangers who share geographical space but lack any genuine political community. Citizens no longer possess the social capital necessary for democratic governance. They cannot work together because they no longer know how to trust, compromise, or subordinate personal preferences to common good. They approach politics as consumers seeking personal benefit rather than as citizens accepting shared responsibility. This social atomization creates a vicious cycle that accelerates democracy's death. As citizens become more isolated, They become more dependent on distant institutions to solve problems they once addressed through local cooperation. This dependency further weakens their capacity for self-government, making them even more isolated and powerless. Democracy dies not through violent revolution but through the gradual erosion of the social bonds that make democratic life possible. Chapter 5: The Corruption of Democratic Equality. The principle of equality that once energized American democracy has been corrupted into something that destroys rather than enhances democratic life. Americans have abandoned the equality of opportunity that allows citizens to develop their unique talents and contribute to common purposes. Instead, they have embraced an equality of results that reduces all citizens to the lowest common denominator while destroying the natural diversity that makes democratic deliberation productive. This perverted equality manifests as a resentment against excellence that undermines the very foundations of democratic culture. Rather than celebrating the achievements that lift entire communities, Americans increasingly demand that all distinctions be eliminated in the name of fairness. Merit becomes suspect, achievement becomes oppressive, and excellence becomes a form of injustice. This creates a society that punishes virtue and rewards mediocrity, making genuine progress impossible. The corruption of equality extends to the realm of truth itself. Americans now insist that all opinions are equally valid rather than subjecting ideas to the rigorous testing that democratic deliberation requires. This false equality of ideas makes rational discourse impossible and reduces political debate to the clash of subjective preferences rather than the examination of objective realities. When all views are equally true, none can be false, and democratic deliberation becomes meaningless. Most destructively, this corrupted equality has eliminated the natural hierarchy of wisdom and experience that healthy societies require. Young people are encouraged to dismiss the accumulated knowledge of their elders, while experienced citizens are silenced for failing to embrace the latest fashions in thought. The result is a society that cannot learn from its mistakes because it refuses to acknowledge that some ideas are better than others, some policies more effective, and some citizens more qualified to lead. This assault on natural distinctions creates a society of enforced uniformity that stifles the very diversity of thought and action that makes democratic life vibrant. Americans have confused equality before the law with identity in all respects, creating a false equality that impoverishes rather than enriches democratic culture. They have forgotten that true equality means equal opportunity to develop unequal talents, not the elimination of all differences. Consider how this corruption affects democratic institutions. Elections become contests between candidates who dare not distinguish themselves too sharply from their opponents. Educational institutions abandon merit-based selection for demographic quotas. Professional organizations prioritize identity over competence. The result is a systematic degradation of institutional quality that undermines public trust and democratic effectiveness. Perhaps most tragically, this false equality destroys the genuine democratic equality I once admired, the equality that made a frontier farmer feel entitled to debate with a Harvard professor about matters of common concern. That equality was based on shared citizenship and common sense, not on the fiction that all opinions are equally informed or all citizens equally qualified for every task. The death of this authentic democratic equality marks another fatal symptom of democracy's broader demise. Chapter 6: The Death of Democratic Deliberation. The final proof that American democracy has died lies in the complete breakdown of democratic deliberation. Citizens no longer engage in the reasoned discussion of public affairs that democracy requires. Instead, they participate in tribal warfare where victory matters more than truth and ideological purity matters more than practical solutions. The art of democratic persuasion, the ability to change minds through evidence and argument, has been replaced by sophisticated techniques of manipulation and mobilization. American political discourse has degenerated into a series of monologues delivered by people who have no interest in learning from those who disagree with them. Citizens seek confirmation of their existing beliefs rather than exposure to challenging ideas. They consume political information like entertainment, rewarding performers who reinforce their prejudices rather than thinkers who expand their understanding. Politics becomes a form of identity expression rather than a method for solving collective problems. This breakdown extends to the institutions that once facilitated democratic discourse. Congress has become a theater where representatives perform for distant audiences rather than deliberate with colleagues. Members arrive with predetermined positions and leave unchanged, having engaged in elaborate kabuki rather than genuine debate. The very architecture of democratic deliberation, committee hearings, floor debates, informal negotiations, has been corrupted into mechanisms for partisan performance. Courts, which once interpreted law according to established principles, now function as superlegislatures where judges impose policy preferences through constitutional interpretation. The rule of law gives way to the rule of ideology, making democratic governance impossible. When legal principles become political weapons, citizens lose faith in the impartial institutions that democratic society requires. Universities, once devoted to the pursuit of truth through open inquiry, have become indoctrination centers that produce graduates who know how to repeat approved opinions but not how to think independently. The Socratic method, that foundation of democratic education, has been replaced by ideological programming that creates citizens incapable of genuine deliberation. The media, which once provided common factual foundations for democratic debate, has fractured into partisan enterprises that serve ideological rather than informational purposes. Citizens no longer share basic facts about reality, making rational deliberation impossible. They inhabit separate cognitive universes with incompatible understandings of even the most elementary questions about their society. Perhaps most tragically, Americans have lost the capacity to distinguish between democratic persuasion and manipulation. They respond to emotional appeals, tribal symbols, and personal attacks rather than to reasoned arguments about policy alternatives. The art of democratic rhetoric, the ability to appeal to citizens' rational faculties while acknowledging their legitimate emotions, has been replaced by sophisticated techniques of mass manipulation that treat citizens as objects to be moved rather than as rational agents capable of self-government. Chapter 7: The Illusion of Democratic Forms. What makes the death of American democracy particularly dangerous is that its corpse continues to walk among the living, maintaining the appearance of vitality while lacking any genuine life. The forms of democracy persist while the substance has been completely evacuated, creating a particularly insidious form of tyranny that conceals itself behind democratic rhetoric and procedures. Americans continue to vote, but their choices are manufactured by elite manipulation rather than generated through genuine democratic deliberation. Elections have become spectacles designed to provide the illusion of popular sovereignty while ensuring that fundamental policies remain unchanged regardless of outcomes. Citizens are offered meaningless choices between candidates who serve the same elite interests while differing only on symbolic issues designed to maintain tribal divisions and prevent genuine political alternatives from emerging. The theater of democratic choice conceals the reality of oligarchic control. The persistence of democratic forms serves the crucial function of legitimizing fundamentally undemocratic governance. Americans accept the authority of their rulers because they believe they have chosen them, even though their choices have been carefully circumscribed by forces beyond their control. This manufactured consent is more effective than crude tyranny because it makes resistance seem both unnecessary and illegitimate. Why rebel against a system you supposedly control? Political parties, once vehicles for organizing citizens around competing visions of the common good, have become sophisticated machines for manipulating public opinion and distributing patronage to elite constituencies. They serve established interests while maintaining the fiction that they represent popular will. Citizens become consumers of political products rather than participants in democratic governance, treated as markets to be captured rather than sovereigns to be served. The Constitution itself, once a living document that structured genuine self-government, has become a museum piece invoked by competing factions to justify predetermined conclusions. Constitutional interpretation follows political preferences rather than legal principles, making the rule of law impossible. The document that once limited government power now provides unlimited justification for whatever those in power wish to do. Consider how the language of democracy has been preserved while its meaning has been systematically corrupted. Freedom now means submission to expert authority. Equality means the elimination of merit-based distinctions. Justice means ideological conformity. Democracy means whatever serves elite interests. This linguistic corruption ensures that citizens cannot even articulate their dissatisfaction with the system that oppresses them. This combination of democratic forms with undemocratic substance creates a particularly insidious tyranny because it makes citizens complicit in their own subjugation. They cannot rebel against oppression they do not recognize, and they cannot reform institutions they believe are already democratic. The death of democracy becomes invisible to its own victims, who continue to believe they live in freedom while accepting the most comprehensive control over their lives that any government has ever achieved. Conclusion. The death of American democracy represents not merely a political tragedy but a civilizational catastrophe of the highest order. What has died is not just a system of government but a way of life that once offered humanity its best hope for combining freedom with order, equality with excellence, individual dignity with collective purpose, and local autonomy with national unity. The American experiment proved that free men could govern themselves through reason and deliberation rather than force and manipulation. Yet perhaps this death was inevitable, written into democracy's very nature. Democracy is an unnatural state that requires constant vigilance and active cultivation to survive. It demands citizens capable of self-restraint, mutual respect, and genuine commitment to the common good, qualities that prosperity and security tend to erode rather than strengthen. When citizens become comfortable and complacent, when they prefer entertainment to engagement and security to liberty, democracy withers and dies. The American people chose this path gradually, trading their birthright of self-government for the mess of pottage offered by administrative expertise, tribal identity, and consumer satisfaction. They preferred the easy path of passive consumption over the demanding work of active citizenship, not recognizing that democracy dies when citizens stop doing the work of democracy. The question now is whether anything can be rebuilt from the ruins, whether Americans can rediscover the arts of association, deliberation, and self-government that their ancestors practiced with such skill. This would require them to choose the difficult path of genuine democracy over the comfortable illusion of managed consent. Most fundamentally, it would require them to remember that democracy is not a gift to be enjoyed but a responsibility to be shouldered by each generation anew.